The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, began as an alliance of three Nahua altepetl city-states: Mexico-Tenochtitlan, Mexico-Texcoco, and Mexico-Tlacopan. These three city-states ruled the area in and around the Valley of Mexico from 1428 until they were defeated by the combined forces of the Spanish conquistadors and the native allies under Hernán Cortés in 1521. The Triple Alliance was formed from the victorious faction in a civil war fought between the city of Azcapotzalco and its former tributary provinces. Despite the initial conception of the empire as an alliance of three self-governed city-states, Tenochtitlan quickly established itself as the dominant partner militarily. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1520, the lands of the alliance were effectively ruled from Tenochtitlan, while the other partners in the alliance had assumed subsidiary roles. The alliance waged wars of conquest and expanded rapidly after its formation. At its height, the alliance controlled most of central Mexico as well as some more distant territories within Mesoamerica such as the Xoconochco province, an Aztec exclave near the present-day Guatemalan border. Aztec rule has been described by scholars as hegemonic or indirect. Rulers of conquered cities were left in power so long as they agreed to pay semi-annual tribute to the alliance as well as supply military forces when needed for the Aztec war efforts. In return, the imperial authority offered protection and political stability in addition to facilitating an integrated economic network of diverse lands and peoples with significant local autonomy despite the tributary status. The state religion of the empire was polytheistic, worshipping a diverse pantheon that included dozens of deities, many of them having the devotion of an officially recognized cult large enough to be represented in the central temple precinct of the capital, Tenochtitlan. The imperial cult, specifically, was that of Huitzilopochtli, the distinctive warlike patron god of the Mexica Aztecs. Peoples in conquered provinces were allowed to retain and freely continue their own religious traditions fully intact, so long as they added the imperial god Huitzilopochtli to the local pantheons. Etymology. The word Aztec is in modern usage an invention that would not have been used by the people themselves. It has variously been used to refer to the Triple Alliance Empire, the Nahuatl-speaking people of central Mexico prior to the Spanish conquest, or specifically the Mexica ethnicity of the Nahuatl-speaking peoples. The name comes from an Nahuatl word meaning people from Aztlan, reflecting the mythical place of origin for Nahu peoples. For the purpose of this article, Aztec refers only to those cities that constituted or were subject to the Triple Alliance. For the broader use of the term, see the article on Aztec civilization history. Before the Aztec Empire, Nahu peoples descended from Chichimeque peoples who migrated to central Mexico from the north in the early 13th century. According to the pictographic codices in which the Aztecs recorded the history, the place of origin was called Aztlan. Early migrants settled the basin of Mexico and surrounding lands by establishing a series of independent city-states. These early Nahua cities were ruled by petty kings called Tatoqua. Most of the cities and towns that had been established before the Nahua migration were assimilated into Nahua culture. These early city-states fought various small-scale wars with each other, but due to shifting alliances no individual city gained dominance. The Mexica were the last of Aztlan migrants to arrive in central Mexico. They entered the basin of Mexico around the year 1250 AD, and by then most of the good agricultural land had already been claimed. The Mexica persuaded the king of Culhuacan to allow them to settle in a relatively infertile patch of land called Chapultepec. the Mexica became hired mercenaries for Culhuacan. After serving Culhuacan in battle, the Mexica were granted one of his daughters to rule over them. According to mythological native accounts, the Mexica instead sacrificed her by flaying her skin. According to native Aztec history, this was done on the command of the god Huitzilopochtli. When the king of Culhuacan learned of this, he attacked and used his army to drive the Mexica from Tizapán by force. The Mexica then moved to an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, where an eagle nested on a nopal cactus. The Mexica interpreted this as a sign from the god and founded the new city Tenochtitlan on this island in the Uruemicali, or Two House. The new Mexico City allied itself with the city of Azcapotzalco and paid tribute to its king, Tezozomoc. With Mexica assistance, Azcapotzalco began to expand into a small tributary empire. Until this point, the Mexica ruler was not recognized as a legitimate king. Mexica leaders successfully petitioned one of the kings of Culhuacan to provide a daughter to marry into the Mexica line. The son, Azcapotzalco, was enthroned as the first Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan in the year 1372, while the Tepenecs of Azcapotzalco expanded the kingdom with help from the Mexica. The Acalua city of Texcoco grew in power in the eastern portion of the lake basin. Eventually, war erupted between the two states, and the Mexica played a vital role in the conquest of Texcoco. By then, Tenochtitlan had grown into a major city and was rewarded for its loyalty to the Tepenecs by receiving Texcoco as a tributary province. The Tepenec War and the Triple Alliance. In 1426, the Tepenec king Tezozomoc died, and the resulting succession crisis precipitated a civil war between the two. The Mexica supported Tezozomoc's preferred heir Talleyrand, who was initially enthroned as king, but his son, Maxtla, soon usurped the throne and turned against factions that opposed him, including the Mexica ruler Chimalpopoca, who died shortly thereafter, possibly assassinated by Maxtla. The new Mexica ruler Itzcoatl remained defiant to Maxtla, and in response Maxtla had Tenochtitlan blockaded and demanded increased tribute payments. Maxtla similarly turned against the Acalua, and the king of Texcoco, Nezahualcoyotl, fled into exile. Nezahualcoyotl recruited military help from the king of Huexocinco, and the Mexica gained the support of a dissident Tepenec city, Tlacopan. In 1427, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, Tlacopan, and Huexocinco went to war with Azcapotzalco and emerged victorious in 1428. After the war, Huexocinco withdrew and the three remaining cities formed a treaty known today as the Triple Alliance. The Tepenec lands were carved up between the three cities, who agreed to cooperate in future wars of conquest. Land acquired from these conquests was to be held by the three cities together. Tribute was to be divided so that 2/5 each went to Tenochtitlan and Texcoco and 1/5 went to Tlacopan. Each of the three kings of the alliance in turn assumed the title Huitzilopochtli, which placed them in a de jure position above the rulers of other city-states. In the next 100 years, the Triple Alliance of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan came to dominate the Valley of Mexico and extend its power to the shores of the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific. Over this period, Tenochtitlan gradually became the dominant power in the alliance. Two of the primary architects of this alliance were the half-brothers Tlacalol and Moctezuma, nephews of Itzcoatl. Moctezuma eventually succeeded Itzcoatl as the Mexica Huitzilopochtli in 1440. Tlacalol occupied the newly created title of Huitzilopochtli, equivalent to something between Prime Minister and Viceroy. Imperial Reforms. Shortly after the formation of the Triple Alliance, Itzcoatl and Tlacopan instigated sweeping reforms on the Aztec state and religion. It has been alleged that Tlacopan ordered the burning of some or most of the extant Aztec books, claiming that they contained lies and that it was not wise that all the people should know the paintings. Even if he did order such book burnings, it was probably limited primarily to documents containing political propaganda from previous regimes. He thereafter rewrote the history of the Aztecs, naturally placing the Mexica in a more central role. After Moctezuma I succeeded Etymology as the Mexico Emperor, more reforms were instigated to maintain control over conquered cities. Uncooperative kings were replaced with puppet rulers loyal to the Mexica. A new imperial tribute system established Mexica tribute collectors that taxed the population directly, bypassing the authority of local dynasties. Nezahualcóyotl also instituted a policy in the Acalua lands of granting subject kings tributary holdings in lands far from the capitals. This was done to create an incentive for cooperation with the empire. If a city's king rebelled, he lost the tribute he received from foreign land. Some rebellious kings were replaced by calpixqua, or appointed governors rather than dynastic rulers. Moctezuma issued new laws that further separated nobles from commoners and instituted the death penalty for adultery and other offenses. By royal decree, a religiously supervised school was built in every neighborhood. Commoner neighborhoods had a school called altepetl, where they received basic religious instruction and military training. A second, more prestigious type of school called Camacag served to teach the nobility, as well as commoners of high standing seeking to become priests or artisans. Moctezuma also created a new title called Quapili that could be conferred on commoners. This title was a form of non-hereditary less nobility awarded for outstanding military or civil service. In some rare cases, commoners that received this title married into royal families and became kings. One component of this reform was the creation of an institution of regulated warfare called the Flower Wars. Mesoamerican warfare overall is characterized by a strong preference for capturing live prisoners as opposed to slaughtering the enemy on the battlefield, which was considered sloppy and gratuitous. The Flower Wars are a potent manifestation of this approach to warfare. These highly ritualized wars ensured a steady, healthy supply of experienced Aztec warriors as well as a steady, healthy supply of captured enemy warriors for sacrifice to the gods. Flower Wars were pre-arranged by officials on both sides and conducted specifically for the purpose of each polity collecting prisoners for sacrifice. According to native historical accounts, these wars were instigated by Tlacopan as a means of appeasing the gods in response to a massive drought that gripped the basin of Mexico from 1450 to 1454. The Flower Wars were mostly waged between the Aztec Empire and the neighboring cities of their archenemy Tlaxcala. Early years of expansion after the defeat of the Tepanecs, Itzcoatl and Nezahualcóyotl rapidly consolidated power in the basin of Mexico and began to expand beyond its borders. The first targets for imperial expansion were Coyoacán in the basin of Mexico and Cuauhnahuac and Huixtepec in the modern Mexican state of Morelos. These conquests provided the new empire with a large influx of tribute, especially agricultural goods. On the death of Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I was enthroned as the new Mexico emperor. The expansion of the empire was briefly halted by a major four-year drought that hit the basin of Mexico in 1450, and several cities in Morelos had to be reconquered after the drought subsided. Moctezuma and Nezahualcóyotl continued to expand the empire east towards the Gulf of Mexico and south into Oaxaca. In 1468, Moctezuma died and was succeeded by his son, Axayacatl. Most of Axayactl's 13-year reign was spent consolidating the territory acquired under his predecessor. Moctezuma and Nezahualcóyotl had expanded rapidly and many provinces rebelled. At the same time as the Aztec Empire was expanding and consolidating power, the Puépcha Empire in West Mexico was similarly expanding. In 1455, the Puépcha under the king Xitzapantecue had invaded the Toluca Valley, claiming lands previously conquered by Moctezuma and Texcoco. In 1472, Axayacatl reconquered the region and successfully defended it from Puépcha attempts to take it back. In 1479, Axayacatl launched a major invasion of the Puépcha Empire with 32,000 Aztec soldiers. The Puépcha met them just across the border with 50,000 soldiers and scored a resounding victory, killing or capturing over 90% of the Aztec army. Axayacatl himself was wounded in the battle, retreated to Tenochtitlan, and never engaged the Puépcha in battle again. In 1472, Nezahualcóyotl died and his son Nezahualpali was enthroned as the new Huetlatoani of Texcoco. This was followed by the death of Axayacatl in 1481. Axayacatl was replaced by his brother Tizoc. Tizoc's reign was notoriously brief. He proved to be ineffectual and did not significantly expand the empire, apparently due to his incompetence. Tizoc was likely assassinated by his own nobles 5 years into his rule. Later years of expansion, Tizoc was succeeded by his brother Huitzotli in 1486. Like his predecessors, the first part of Huitzil's reign was spent suppressing rebellions that were commonplace due to the indirect nature of Aztec rule. Huitzotli then began a new wave of conquests including the Oaxaca Valley and the Soconusco coast. Due to increased border skirmishes with the Puépchas, Huitzotli conquered the border city of Otzoma and turned the city into a military outpost. The population of Otzoma was either killed or dispersed in the process. The Puépcha subsequently established fortresses nearby to protect against Aztec expansion. Huitzotli responded by expanding further west to the Pacific coast of Guerrero. By the reign of Huitzotli, the Mexica were the largest and most powerful faction in the Aztec Triple Alliance. Building on the prestige the Mexica had acquired over the course of the conquests, Huitzotli began to use the title Huetlatoani to distinguish himself from the rulers of Texcoco and Tlacopan. Even though the alliance still technically ran the empire, the Mexica emperor now assumed nominal if not actual seniority. Huitzotli was succeeded by his brother Moctezuma II in 1502. Moctezuma II spent most of his reign consolidating power in lands conquered by his predecessors. In 1515, Aztec armies commanded by the Tlaxcalan general Tecuichol invaded the Puépcha Empire once again. The Aztec army failed to take any territory and was mostly restricted to raiding. The Puépchas defeated them and the army withdrew. Moctezuma II instituted more imperial reforms. After the death of Nezahualcóyotl, the Mexica emperors had become the de facto rulers of the alliance. Moctezuma II used his reign to attempt to consolidate power more closely with the Mexica emperor. He removed many of Huitzil's advisors and had several of them executed. He also abolished the Quapili class, destroying the chance for commoners to advance to the nobility. His reform efforts were cut short by the Spanish conquest in 1519. Spanish conquest. Spanish expedition leader Hernán Cortés landed in Yucatan in 1519, with approximately 630 men. Cortés had actually been removed as the expedition's commander by the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, but he had stolen the boats and left without permission. At the island of Cozumel, Cortés encountered a shipwrecked Spaniard named Geronimo de Aguilar, who joined the expedition and translated between Spanish and Mayan. The expedition then sailed west to Campeche, where after a brief battle with the local army, Cortés was able to negotiate peace through his interpreter, Aguilar. The king of Campeche gave Cortés a second translator, a bilingual Nahua Maya slave woman named Malintizan. Aguilar translated from Spanish to Mayan and Malintizan translated from Mayan to Nahuatl. Once Malinke learned Spanish, she became Cortés's translator for both language and culture, and was a key figure in interactions with Nahua rulers. An important article, Rethinking Malinke, by Francis Cartunen, examines her role in the conquest and beyond. Cortés then sailed from Campeche to Zempoala, a tributary province of the Aztec Triple Alliance. Nearby, he founded the town of Veracruz, where he met with ambassadors from the reigning Mexican Emperor, Moctezuma II. When the ambassadors returned to Tenochtitlan, Cortés went to Zempoala to meet with the local Totonac leaders. After the Totonac ruler told Cortés of his various grievances against the Mexica, Cortés convinced the Totonacs to imprison an imperial tribute collector. Cortés subsequently released the tribute collector after persuading him that the move was entirely the Totonacs' idea and that he had no knowledge of it. Having effectively declared war on the Aztecs, the Totonacs provided Cortés with 20 companies of soldiers for his march to Tlaxcala. At this time, several of Cortés' soldiers attempted to mutiny. When Cortés discovered the plot, he had his ships scuttled and sank them in the harbor to remove any possibility of escaping to Cuba. The Spanish-led Totonac army crossed into Tlaxcala to seek the latter's alliance against the Aztecs. However, the Tlaxcalan general Xicotencath the Younger believed them to be hostile and attacked. After fighting several close battles, Cortés eventually convinced the leaders of Tlaxcala to order their general to stand down. Cortés then secured an alliance with the people of Tlaxcala, and traveled from there to the basin of Mexico with a smaller company of 5,000–6,000 Tlaxcalans and 400 Totonacs, in addition to the Spanish soldiers. During his stay in the city of Cholula, Cortés claims he received word of a planned ambush against the Spanish. In a preemptive response, Cortés directed his troops attack and kill a large number of unarmed Cholulans gathered in the main square of the city. Following the massacre at Cholula, Hernán Cortés and the other Spaniards entered Tenochtitlan, where they were greeted as guests and given quarters in the palace of former Emperor Axayacatl. After staying in the city for 6 weeks, 2 Spaniards from the group left behind in Veracruz were killed in an altercation with an Aztec lord named Calpopoca. Cortés claims that he used this incident as an excuse to take Moctezuma prisoner under threat of force. For several months, Moctezuma continued to run the kingdom as a prisoner of Hernán Cortés. Then, in 1520, a second, larger Spanish expedition arrived under the command of Panfilo de Narvaez, sent by Diego Velázquez with the goal of arresting Cortés for treason. Before confronting Narvaez, Cortés secretly persuaded Narvaez's lieutenants to betray him and join Cortés. While Cortés was away from Tenochtitlan dealing with Narvaez, his second-in-command Pedro de Alvarado massacred a group of Aztec nobility in response to a ritual of human sacrifice honoring Huitzilopochtli. The Aztecs retaliated by attacking the palace where the Spanish were quartered. Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan and fought his way to the palace. He then took Moctezuma up to the roof of the palace to ask his subjects to stand down. However, by this point the ruling council of Tenochtitlan had voted to depose Moctezuma and had elected his brother Quetzalcoatl as the new emperor. One of the Aztec soldiers struck Moctezuma in the head with a sling stone, and he died several days later, although the exact details of his death, particularly who was responsible, are unclear. The Spaniards and their allies, realizing they were vulnerable to the hostile Mexica in Tenochtitlan following Moctezuma's death, attempted to retreat without detection in what is known as the Sad Night, or La Noche Triste. Spaniards and their Indian allies were discovered clandestinely retreating, and then were forced to fight the way out of the city, with heavy loss of life. Some Spaniards lost their lives by drowning, loaded down with gold. They retreated to Tlacopan and made their way to Tlaxcala, where they recovered and prepared for the second, successful assault on Tenochtitlan. After this incident, a smallpox outbreak hit Tenochtitlan. As the indigenous of the New World had no previous exposure to smallpox, this outbreak alone killed more than 50% of the region's population, including the emperor Quetzalcoatl. While the new emperor Cuauhtémoc dealt with the smallpox outbreak, Cortés raised an army of Tlaxcalans, Texcocans, Totonacs, and others discontent with Aztec rule, with a combined army of up to 100,000 warriors, the overwhelming majority of which were indigenous rather than Spanish. Cortés marched back into the basin of Mexico. Through numerous subsequent battles and skirmishes, he captured the various indigenous city-states or altepetl around the lakeshore and surrounding mountains, including the other capitals of the Triple Alliance, Tlacopan and Texcoco. Texcoco in fact had already become firm allies of the Spaniards and the city-state, and subsequently petitioned the Spanish crown for recognition of the services in the conquest, just as Tlaxcala had done, using boats constructed in Texcoco from parts salvaged from the scuttled ships. Cortés blockaded and laid siege to Tenochtitlan for a period of several months. Eventually, the Spanish-led army assaulted the city both by boat and using the elevated causeways connecting it to the mainland. Although the attackers took heavy casualties, the Aztecs were ultimately defeated. The city of Tenochtitlan was thoroughly destroyed in the process. Cuauhtémoc was captured as he attempted to flee the city. Cortés kept him prisoner and tortured him for a period of several years before finally executing him in 1525.